Last night at an event that was enjoyed by 15, 17 people, including me, was a presentation given by the man called the Gnome of Strawberry Plains. His name is John Ballinger. Strawberry Plains is a town northeast of Knoxville. And this is a man whose name is on some bad case law, as they call it, bad opinions out of the Tennessee Court of Appeals. He is one who asks the wrong question and gets the answers he gets answers that are remarkable and I would say fictional. He is a free person. There are not many free people in Tennessee, not very many free people really in the country. The ones who fit that description are legally have a higher legal status than the rest of us who have entered into commerce or have entered into the corporate world and taken on some aspect of limited liability through interactions with government, interactions with insurance companies, and others that shield us from the responsibility that in a biblical or common law society would come to us if we have done any wrong. And this John Ballinger, the Gnome of Strawberry Plains, is a carpenter, former carpenter, 75 years old. When I arrived at the meeting hall on Highway 58 last night, he was getting some massage on his shoulders, which are in very bad shape after years as a carpenter, worn out. He's in a lot of pain, and who to the assembled host about his life, telling war stories about interactions with the IRS, federal courts, and police, highway patrol people, and his sin on the side of movement, of free movement of his whole person, has been over whether he can move about as a matter of right or only as a matter of permission. In other words, am I free as our soldiers fought to keep us free, right? Am I free as the colonial forebears fought to keep us free against the British, right? Or am I not? And must I submit? Must I submit myself and come underneath and authority and permission and even protection and security of others, such as town councils, state government agencies, police, and others who raise themselves up above the other people in society and make themselves the protectors, the guardians, the overseers, and effectively the rulers. And so his presentation of war stories dealing with the IRS over taxation and whether or not he should sign a 1040 form, and questions over whether the THP officer had probable cause to stop him were among the things that he mentioned last night. If you go to Facebook at Nougat Radio, you can see what the Gnome of Strawberry Plains looks like. If you haven't seen his picture before at my hand, and hear a little bit of his southern drawl and his way of presenting his stories. And he asks questions about what Americans are willing to do to be free. And my quick answer to you, my listener here on the David Tula Show, is that we are not willing to do anything, right? We're not willing to do anything. And we are willing to accept all the conveniences of the life as corporation, life in a corporate society, life under corporate and commercial government. We're willing to accept that, and just live in a kind of fear, right? Because if you live in a common law or biblical society where you are responsible for your own wrongs and torts, and you don't enjoy limited liability, if you live in that kind of society, you have fear of one kind. But if you live under commercial government, you have fear of a different kind. Just as a man who files tax returns lives in fear of an audit and the pervasive searching gaze of the IRS, so a man who doesn't file tax returns, though someone might allege he is liable to do so, that man lives in fear, if he has any at all, of a different kind, and that is that he's going to be challenged in his stand for his liberty. And he's going to be challenged in his refusal to sign the jurat, the penalty of perjury line there, the line of type just over your signature line. He refuses to sign that because he knows that when he does that, he waives his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination in a criminal matter. That's when you sign that form, you are affirming that everything that you say in there is true, that all the definitions are true, all the legal language, which is full of legal language on a tax return. You're admitting and confessing that all those things are true, that they do apply to you, that you are subject and liable for performance to give out all that information, and in the end, to testify against yourself. And that's what the gnome says he has always been unwilling to do, and has not filed, I don't think, filed tax returns as a person liable or taxpayer for many years. And so that was part of his conversation. And the other part was about the entanglement with the state through the apparatus of the Tennessee Department of Safety and Homeland Security, which he says he has nothing to do with, and which in his sketch of the legal landscape for his listeners, he said has only administrative authority, only administrative jurisdiction, and that administrative jurisdiction is well below where you are, my listener. You, my listener, even if you are compromised, are protected by the Constitution because you are an individual, right? You're a human being and a person, maybe not person in the legal sense that's used, such as are you a U.S. person? Not that kind, but a human being made in God's image, right? A person with flesh and blood, without any corporate things attaching to yourself, either giving you benefits or liabilities. And so we enter into that administrative realm by application. And he emphasized in his presentation that in the driver's license statute in Tennessee, you apply for it and you are subject to it by application. You enter into it because you are in fact going into commerce, and you are going to be carrying goods or people for hire, and will be under the commercial driver's license statute, right? It's called the commercial driver's license statute for a reason. And you, my listener, have voluntarily entered into that realm to become subject to the state and have your presence on the roadways only by permission, right? Only by permission. And your protections for your protections under the Constitution for the freedom of searches and seizures is reduced, right? Your threshold, your protections are sharply reduced under Title 55, and there is a presumption. There are all kinds of presumptions that you agree to being part of that realm. And so we've all done these things voluntarily. And the gnome of Strawberry Plains is asking, well, is that what we really want? And is anyone willing to say no? And I think the question of saying no is a real one. Can we say no? Most people think they can't. Most people have a Social Security number, that they have to have one for their child. They think that the impulsions and compulsions of the modern state, whether on the state level or the federal level, are irresistible, and in fact, in law somewhere, right? We have to have these connections. We have to make these submissions because somewhere someone wrote a law that bound me, makes me liable for performance, and so we read all about the penalty statutes, and often though we find that there's no liability statute. For example, in answering census questions, there's a penalty for not answering the census question or taking the community survey, which is annual. It's an annual survey, but there's a decennial census question, the main census every 10 years. Though there is a penalty statute that creates a fine, there's no liability statute that is antecedent of it. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? There has to be something beforehand that makes the requirement so that the penalty statute for not answering the census question applies, right? You can't. So what you have in many cases is you have a penalty statute, but no antecedent liability statute. And what's enforced is not the liability statute, but the penalty statute. The enforcers, the DA, if there were ever a criminal case filed in not answering the census, the DA would have to pretend that the penalty statute is the liability statute. And the tax system works the same way. There's not a liability statute, but there is a penalty statute, and those are the ones that are enforced. And so what we have here is a landscape where, as John Ballinger, the gnome, says, there's a paper tiger. We have paper tigers in the room, and we are cowering in the corners because we're not free. No one really knows anything. And the legal system and all these laws are so many and so vast and so complicated that we just, even though we have the internet, right? Even though the U.S. code is online, et cetera, the Tennessee code's online, et cetera, we just don't know. And so we are living under fear. We're bound, if you will, by chains of paper. And even though we are bound by chains of paper, I argue on the David Tullis show here at 92.7 FM that we can still obtain some liberties that bring some prosperity. We don't have to. We're fearful people, right? We are fearful people like the Israelites often were, and we are subject to fear of man and not fear of God. That's why as I was reading this morning, trying to get caught up in my Bible reading, I was reading about in Jeremiah chapter 39 and 40 about the king Zedekiah, I think the name is, was confident that God would not let Jerusalem fall to the Babylonians because there was a kind of a racial claim upon God because we are the Israelites, right? We're Israelite by DNA. God would never let that happen, and yet of course it did because of their sins. And many of the sins of the Israelites were fear of man and not fear of God, not fear of disobeying His commandments, which are few and simple, right? But fear of man and fear of circumstances, which creates when you have fear of man and fear of circumstances, fear of the unknown, what you tend to do, especially if you have authority, is to harass the poor and harass those, and you gather up to yourself authority, money, funds, capacity, because you're living in fear too. And so that's why there were all these abuses of the poor, the stranger, the alien, and the widow and the orphan in Israel, and much sin, homosexuality, many other sins that crept up upon the people and crept into their culture, for which they were judged. And so living in fear of man is one thing, living in fear of God is the other. And in this country, in the Chattanooga area, people live in fear of man. They simply live in fear of man, and men have written so many words, and it's we don't have manual typewriters only anymore like they did in the 1930s when many of these laws were written. We have computers, and computers generate much more words, just as the banking sector creates billions and billions of new dollars digitally. So we have word processors, and the good people write more and more and more words, constantly writing more words to bind us underneath and to make us safe, right? To make us safe. I'm thinking in saying this as my time flees me. You know what? Well, hold on a second. If you want to call me and interrupt me, you just go right ahead. And your call really matters to me. The number is 800-8949. Just call that number. That's the David Tullis show here at 92.7. And you're thinking, well, boy, if I call David and interrupt him, I won't get to hear what he has to say about East Ridge. But you can do that. You can do that. 800-8949. 800-8949. Yournews.com is our sponsor. Yournews.com. Go there and look at my reports at yournews.com. Some of which are also found at Nooganomics. Nooganomics, the website for the man who matters. Yes, I know it's not popular. It won't ever be popular. And that's because very few people really matter. And only people who matter go to Nooganomics.com. So if you are not in that category, that's fine. That's fine. You don't wear a bow tie either, and yet look how smart you are. You don't have to go there to be fully informed, but the people who matter read Nooganomics.com. And other people, the hoi polloi, they can get their news from me at yournews.com, the Chattanooga platform, yournews.com. Now, in East Ridge, there's been passage on first reading. I'm picking up here the story in Chattanooga.com about the East Ridge ordinance dealing with short-term vacation rentals. It got through the first reading, and the reading of it and the creation of this document, which runs, as I said, words and words. Right, we have many words in our day that bind us in chains of paper. Okay, let's put it. We're bound by chains of paper, and the words are venturing into dangerous areas. The 13 pages of words that East Ridge has already passed on first reading, and we'll be considering again in voluminous volubility, ordinance number 1073, to amend the zoning ordinance to create the Airbnb short-term vacation rental district in that municipality. Now, what I want to, oddly enough, I had a hard time finding this morning by Googling Hale versus Henkel, the case from, 1804 or 1904, something like that, a case that makes the important distinction between the private individual and the corporation, right? The private individual who maintains all of his constitutional rights because government does nothing for him, right? Does nothing for him, has no claim upon him, and his area, his domain, if you will, is completely unmolested by the state. And the area where there is not that molestation, there's not that claim, is that's the private. But where there is potentially is in commerce, in the corporate world. When you have a corporation, you are more likely to be bound by claims upon your activities. Now, what we have in East Ridge is a proposal for a ban on the private use of your property. Okay, it is first of all, there's a ban. This is how all licensing schemes are created. First of all, the high court, one ruling I read said that the legislature does not have to first ban the activity that is to be licensed, but simply the creation of the licensing scheme implies the work, the antecedent work, the work before. It's merely implied that it is banned. Okay, so it's banned. Home ownership is first in East Ridge banned. Okay, got that. Now we are going to allow it under these circumstances. So that's how every licensing scheme works. And Tennessee is very bad for licensing occupations. Now, owning a house is not an occupation, and using your house to have guests from Dubai or Seattle is a private activity, and yet the ordinance pretends that you will now be prohibited from doing that unless you are in circumstances that we control from the very beginning. We will control these circumstances from the beginning with our ordinance 1073, and so I didn't quite get the details in reading the first 10 pages of this or so, but the Chattanooga.com post says that it allows for rentals in certain zones, but not those for a single family. And the quote here is from Kenny Custer, the director of community services, and I got from his hand a copy of the ordinance yesterday. And what it does is, as I say, it makes illegal this activity, but then allows it within certain districts. And so the question again is the private use of your private home by an individual, a private person like you in that town, is that something that can be regulated, or is it not? In the whereases of this ordinance, they usually begin with the whereases, giving the rationale for it, right? The need for it. It talks about rationally based and reasonably tailored regulations. All regulations are reasonable, right? They're always rational. And constitutional rights repeatedly fall before them, right? Rights that are God-given because you're made in God's image and that are guaranteed by our constitutions, rights that are inherent in your person as a man or woman, and rights that are unalienable, that cannot be alienated, even though you may traffic in your rights and sell them. Those are the inalienable rights, by the way, that you sell and trade away. The unalienable ones are still there, and you can't traffic them in them, and you can't trade them up. That's a legal point, by the way. And the reason you have unalienable rights is because you're made in God's image. And so even in all this whole question about rights and liberties versus authority, that is something that Christianity has about which Christianity has a lot to say. The ordinance goes on to say that the council deems it necessary to amend the zoning ordinance to now get this. Again, this is just posturing. Balance the right of property owners to use their property in all lawful ways. Okay, that's on one side. Against, on the other side, the right of property owners to the quiet use and enjoyment of their property. So there's a pretense that somehow if you have an Airbnb house or duplex and you rent it out to strangers through the internet, right, through the intergalactic internet, here in the gig city, that you're pitting the quiet use of enjoyment of a neighbor versus your increasing your cash flow and creating value in your community, right? The value in your community is the fact that you live there and that you have people visiting your property and staying there for a time, giving you money, which what do you do with that money? Well, you spend it on shopping, right? You spend it on shopping, you buy things, you eat out at the local restaurant, right? You go to Armando's and eat out. It goes on to say the the view of the ordinance, the city seeks to require owners of residential dwelling unit used in this rentals scheme to apply for and secure a permit authorizing such use in the manner provided. So in other words, there's the ban, and now we're going to alleviate the ban by saying you can avoid the ban, you can get around the ban of private use of private property by private people by applying to us for a permit. And it goes on. This is David Toulis. We argue that you should love your neighbor and buy local, and I want you to be loco-centric and nougat-centric as I'm trying to be. I'm trying really hard to be that, though I'm a cosmopolite by birth, I suppose. But I'm really trying to be a Chattanoogan. Very hard. And I think that you should love your neighbor and buy local, and call me 800-8949. 3, 2